have our user. We have our user, and this perfectly represents me. All right, but you know, what if I don't want to be me, or what if somebody else wants to log on to you know, be somebody else? I have to create a new user, right? Um, so let's see who we have inside the class today. I can pick on you guys. Uh, Stick on Max a little bit. So I want to make a Max. You know, what is Max? You know, Max has a name of Max, right? He has a password of. You have any input of what your password is, Matthew? Max. Okay. JavaScript. Good password. Um, he has an address of and he has a age of, let's say, 20. All right, and this read user we can keep because it's flexible. It can be used over and over again. So if I said console.log max.read, now uh, our project, our max object is up and running. But these use the exact same variables, you know, keys. To do this every single time would be a waste of time, you know. Uh, and this is why we have classes. Um, so let's think of classes as a blueprint for a blueprint for our objects. You know, um, when we have to create multiple objects, we don't want to be stuck writing them one by one. That's not very efficient. You know, we want to be able to write code once and be able to use it an infinite amount of time. Um, so that's where we can create a user class, right? I'm gonna keep my first user up there. I'm gonna change it to Joshua just so I have reference of what the user class is gonna contain. Yeah. So in order to create a class, we have to use the class keyword. I mean, it's pretty straightforward, right? And then we have to give the class a name. When we're naming our classes, we want them to make sense. You know, we're creating a user, so I feel like a good name for our class is user. Um, we notice that sometimes I use uppercase, sometimes I use lowercase, right? Like we can see here, I use lowercase and then uppercase. We try to use that type of capitalization when using regular code, but when we're creating a class, we want to use uppercase. All right. All right. So like everything else, we can define what goes inside of a class by creating a class with the type of class you want to make. So a user class, and then a curly bracket. So now we have a class. There's nothing inside of it, but we can give it it value. You know. Um, so the first thing we should understand is that um, we have to create a process when this class is created to set variables. All right. And what I mean by variable, I mean keys really. So we have all these keys, and we want to pass um, parameters to a function to create this class. So the way we create a new class, like a new class object. So we would say create Ryan or with Max, you know, by saying let Max equal a new user, and then we make it have a parentheses, and we would pass the parameters into this parentheses that define Max as a user. All right, and the way that we turn those parameters into the actual user is through a constructor. All right, so we write constructor and then add a parentheses. All right, because this constructor is a function. This is the function that runs when we create the class for the first time. Um, so everything that we want customizable about a class, we should set it right now. When it's being created. So our user, our Joshua object up here takes a couple things. It takes a name, right? It takes a password, and it takes an address, and it takes an age. All right. So now, when we declare our max user down here, we have to pass in a name. Sorry about that. A name, a password. So we can make this anything. Let's make it an address. So I think I had a pre-code before. I'm gonna keep it. And an age, 20. Right? So now this constructor has access to these parameters that you passed within the inside of these parentheses. All right. But that doesn't mean anything unless we set them to key value pairs. And the way that we do that is within this constructor block. All right. This block of code right here between these two curly brackets. Right. So we want the name to be equal to this dot name. And we want this password to be equal to password. We want this address to be equal to address. We want this dot age equal to age. Cool. So now when we create a new user, we can console log dot max dot name, and it's max, and max dot password, max dot address, and max. Okay. Are we all on the same page? We understand like what this is used for and why we do this, um, and how to do this. I want to give you guys a little time to just accept all this information, and if we need to go over anything, this will be a good time to ask any questions. Okay. 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 So, um, if we remember from last week, or even before, we know that we can also add functions. You know, we have this read user function. So, the way that we add a function to uh, this class is, you know, we just write the name of the function with a parentheses, yeah, parentheses, and then curly brackets, and then we define the function within this curly brackets. It's actually a lot easier than defining it with an object literal. So I'm just gonna take this code and reuse it, and then I'm gonna say max dot read user. But now we, you know, um, let's create. I'm gonna scroll up a little bit so you can see. Is that good for everybody? Um, let's create a new user named Sabrina, right? And you know, we'll say instead you took a C++ class, so C++. Uh, their address is different. Uh, and your age is say 20. All right. So now I have access to both of these completely different, distinct users that both share the user class. Okay. Um, this is a really good concept. We just need to get our heads around um, when building projects. All right. Um, is everybody okay with this? I can delete all this and we can move on to a different type of class. Look, I beaten a dead horse, and I want to use a new example. So let's have a class of button. And where does that sound familiar, right? You know, from regular programming. Um, and we don't have to put a constructor. You know what? Let's put a constructor just to make it. You don't have to, but a constructor sets up the class for you. So if you need to add in parameters and customize it, you need a constructor to initialize all that. Constructor, which is going to take a height, a width, and a color. Because you know buttons have heights, they have widths, they have colors. So we're gonna set this height. Okay, this height is equal to height. This width just a color. Sorry. And we notice that this is not like the way we set the original parameters in an object. That's because this is a function, all right? And we're actually setting this variable to that value. You know, we're passing in a value here, and we're setting it to the value that's stored within the button, right? Oops. Little side note: we can also have private key value pairs. So if we don't want somebody to access it without proper outside of a certain permission, um, we can set a hashtag for the key, and now this is a private key. But don't worry about that; it's not a big deal. Okay, so now let's think about a button, right? What what does a button do? Like what's the main function of a button? I mean, it doesn't have to be a specific function. Let's think very abstractly. A button clicks, right? You press a button. So we can write a function named press, right? And now we can set what this function will do when the button is pressed. Um, so we can just return press, right? So if we create a new button, I'm gonna call it BNT. I can't remember. I can't think of a name for a button. Sorry. And we say new button, which I'm sorry, I messed up. This should be a capital, just because it's best practices. New button, and we set the height to 20, the width to 100, and the color to red. Right? We can console .log now the button being pressed. Oh, sorry. Pressed. Okay, and this is really a hard concept to maybe get your head around, but we should really think about what we are building as objects. Everything that we do in code are objects. Um, this is a very specific type of programming called object-oriented programming. Um, it's much different from uh, our usual coding exercises that I showed you last week, where we were making functions that perform an operation. Um, this class is just a blueprint. It does not exist until we actually instantiate it right here, right? Um, I can't access button directly. Um, it's just a representation of what could be. This actual btn variable, though, is an actual button with a height, a width, and a color. All right. Let's do a couple more of these, just so that I can really get my point across. So that we can understand that an object could be anything, anything. And objects can be inside of other objects. So let's think about a bike, right? Okay. What does a bike have? Let's think about the parts of a bike. Two wheels, cool, wheels. All right. So um, okay. Uh, I'm gonna say wheel because yeah, pedals, handles, gear thingy. We'll consider that pedals. We don't need to get too complex, but yeah, gear thingies, the shifters. I would say a frame, you know, but just keep it simple. Um, now I look, I said wheel, right? Um, because in a sense, the front wheel and the back wheel will be exactly the same, right? I mean, they might have technically they might have differences, but for our purposes, we can say that the size of the wheel will be the same. So we can say front wheel, and we can set that to wheel, and we can say this back wheel is also equal to wheel. There are different wheels, but they have the same value. You know, we said this dot pedals is equal to pedals. This dot uh, handles are equal to handles, and uh, this dot frame is equal to frame. Now, realistically, um, we would say wheel size here and frame size, um, because this is the actual frame. We're just stating a characteristic about the frame, and we're stating a characteristic about the wheel. Um, but what we're saying here is that this represents this. Okay, and then let's think about the functions of a bike. All right, can we name some functions of a bike? Like, what are the basic functions that we need to do with the bike? Yeah, we can just say move forward, right? We don't have to get too complex. Move, and for the time being, we will say return moving forward. Actually, you know what? Let's do something else. Let's create a um let's create a speed, right? And we notice how I don't place this with inside the constructor, all right? Because the speed is not going to be set by somebody else when you're creating, like, when the speed is when the bike is created at the factory, they don't set the speed. You know, you set the speed, and when you get the bike, the speed is zero, all right? Because it's initialized to zero. All right, so no matter what happens, no matter what bike we build, what specs we give it, the speed will always be zero when we are not riding it, right? So we're going to say this. dot speed equals to 1. And then we're going to have a stop function to stop function to say, we're no longer going that speed. Our speed is now 0. Okay? So when we construct our bike, let shiny new bike equal a new bike with some parameters. 23, I don't know why I picked that. Type of pedals, I think that's a bike company. Handles, I don't know any types. Straight bar. The straight bar handles, and the frame is 43. So now we have a new bike. Okay, so now we can console log our bike just to make sure it's valid. And, shiny new bike, say speed. Oh, sorry, I changed the variable name and did not change the name. Gotta make sure when you make changes to your code, you change everything. Okay, so I created a new bike, shiny new bike, with a wheel size of 23, with pedals, with a brand that I don't know if that's even a brand or not, a straight bar, and a frame size of 43. All right, and it also has a speed of 0, but that's because every bike, when you are not riding it, has a speed of 0. Okay, so now I can view the values of speed by using dot notation, saying shiny new bike, which is the name of our new bike, dot speed, which gives us a 0. Okay. If I say move, okay, nothing's returned, but we can go console.log shiny bike, and it should be 1. Okay, and we understand why this is 1, because up here we're saying this bike should move. All right, and now we're just viewing the speed of the bike, which is 1. And now if I would take this, I'm just gonna copy and paste it, and I say I don't want this bike to move anymore. So now we see we're initiating the bike to move. We're seeing the speed of the bike, which is 1. Then we're saying the bike should stop. And then now we're seeing the speed is 0. All right, we're controlling everything about this bike. We can build endless amount of functions to do with this bike. Right turn, left turn, whatever you really want. We can add new functions to this bike, or variables to this bike as we want. Does everybody get why we would want to do this and how this is useful? Is everybody following along? Okay. Joel gets it. Okay, I was planning Vanessa, can you do me a favor? Can you cut it here? And then the rest of this we're just gonna talk about the project coming up and working through the project.